Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Outliers YouTube channel and our program, Get to Know. I'm your host, DP Lyle. I'm here with my co-host and partner in crime, Kathleen Antrim.
Thanks, Doug. It is great to be here. And we have a fabulous interview for you today. She's going to be talking about her new book that's coming out, but we have a number of questions for her before we get started. She's New York Times, a best-selling author, and just a wonderful human to boot. Allison Brennan, thanks for coming on Get to Know. It's great to have you here today.
It is always great to chat with both of you. I feel like I'm so lucky because I get both of you at the same time.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Most people run away. There is that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Allison, I want to take a little different approach today in talking to you and getting to know a little bit more about the writer side of you. And I want to talk about when did you write your first book?
That's actually a hard question. I know exactly when I finished my first book.
Okay.
So I've always wanted to be a writer, but I never finished anything for years. And then I got married when I was 23. I had a couple kids. I had a career, and I never finished anything I started. And then after my son was born in 2001, I read Lisa Gardner's The Third Victim, which amazing. And then Iris Johansen's The Search. And I said, that's exactly what I want to write. These are the kinds of stories I want to write. So when I had to go back to work, I really didn't want to, but mortgage, kids, I started seriously writing. And so I made that commitment to myself in March of 2002 that I would finish one of the books I started. So I picked the one that I thought had a good idea, finished it in 3 months. And I did that by because I worked full time, and at the time
I was going to say, and then you had a new baby.
Yeah, I had 3 kids at the time, but I wrote every night by giving up television. So I wrote every night from 9 to midnight, gave up television for 3 years. So my first book did not sell. I finished it in June of 2002, but then I started my next book. So my first book I sent out to agents, got hundreds of rejections. The second book I said, oh, but that's okay because my second book is so much better. And then I got a bunch more rejections, but a couple requests. And it wasn't until I finished my 5th book when did I finish that? I think it was like near the end of 2003. So I wrote 5 books in 2 years. And I finished the book, and I kind of had a sense. I had a critique group, and they really liked it. And I kind of had the sense, okay, this is it. It was a romantic suspense. I queried I queried 12 agents, and I had 7 requests for the full manuscript. So I knew at that point that was definitely the book that had whatever it is, which we can't define. It was just, I think I just felt like it was an exciting, complete story. And even though my agent sold the book, and I had a 3-book deal from Ballantine, which was awesome, I still ended up rewriting almost completely the last third of that book, and what with editor revisions. Yep. So, that's the process. So that's kind of how I got started. It was my 5th finished manuscript that I actually sold.
So, I'm discussing this to give people hope who are, starting out writing. So from the time you basically finished your first book, how many years was that?
Oh, from when I finished, it was 2 years.
2 years?
Literally 2 years from when, because I sold. So I started my first book, the first book I finished, in March of 2002, and I sold in March of 2004.
Okay. And that's a lot faster.
I had 5 kids. Well, my 5th kid was born in 2004 after I sold. So that, I guess that doesn't count. But I worked full time, and I had 4 kids.
Yeah.
But
it can be done.
I did give up TV. Yeah. And so what I did was, as I said, these 3 hours, that is the time that is for me and my writing. Yeah. And I don't clean. I know people say, I give up cleaning. Well, I really never cleaned. It's like my husband does the cleaning, I did the cooking. It was a good arrangement.
Sure.
Because we both worked, so why should I have to do all of it plus work? And so I said, I don't like cleaning, and I'm not going to do it. I love to cook. So I was happy to keep my kids alive. So It's just a matter of committing the time, and you have to be you have to treat it seriously because you're the only one that actually cares if you're published. You're the only one. Nobody else really cares until you actually have a contract, and then you have deadlines, and people do care that you meet your deadlines. But until then, you're the only one that really cares if you ever finish a book, edit the book, get the book out there, find an agent. No one else cares as much as you. So you have to make that commitment and take consider of any other. I don't like to call it a hobby because obviously it was not a hobby. I was absolutely writing to be published. But there are some very serious hobbies like sports or gardening, people that are very, very serious about their gardening, and they commit a lot of time to these. You have to do the same with your writing.
I think that is a great lesson. I've always said that there is no perfect time to write. There's only now. And in your circumstance back then, you had every excuse in the world not to sit down and write for those 3 hours every day. But you didn't. You stuck to it and said, "This is what I want to do, and this is where I'm going." And I think that is a great lesson because carve out the time and then do it. And you're not going to write a book unless you write a book. It's as simple as that. And it's hard,
Absolutely.
hard, hard work. Yeah. Anybody says it's easy is lying. Or they're using AI. One or the other.
So true. So let me ask you, it takes a lot to learn how to write a book. So how did you go about actually teaching yourself or learning? It's very hard to go to a university and learn. Most professors aren't doing commercial writing, so they don't really know how to teach it. Some places they do. So how did you actually, go about really learning the craft?
Well, I didn't really do much of anything. I am a huge reader and I always have been. I think most writers started as readers. So I know what is a good story. And I started by reading Trixie Belden. I was like 7 years old and I love those books. And, of course, Nancy Drew. And then you go into Agatha Christie. And when we were younger, there was no YA. So you basically graduated from Nancy Drew to Stephen King. There was no in between. There was no Holly Jackson or Karen McManus or all these great YA writers that I would have just devoured as a teenager. We didn't have any of that. I think we had like Paula Danzinger and Joe Nixon Lowry and a few others that were kind of writing. Lois Duncan was another one, but that was it. There was really not many. Um, so I think by just reading a lot, I kind of knew how stories were told. I'm a college dropout. I dropped out of college after 2 years. I just wasn't interested in it. And which was really sad because I did go to a college prep high school. And it wasn't my thing. And I got a job and just kept reading. When I first got serious about writing, I looked into Romance Writers of America. So this was back in 2002 when they were really at their strongest. I think RWA completely imploded um, over like the last 10 years. But back then they did more than any other organization for aspiring writers. It wasn't just for published writers. Like Mystery Writers is a great organization, but it was predominantly published authors. RWA had local chapters where you could go and meet other writers. And while I wasn't really writing romance, I was writing romantic suspense at first. Um, it was a way to talk to people and to like kind of take online classes to sort of figure out like, well, what is point of view? I knew it intuitively, but I couldn't define it. Um, I don't put a lot of stock in a lot of writing books. I actually didn't read any writing books before I was published, except for Stephen King's On Writing, which I listened to in the car on audiobook because he narrated it. Um, you can learn things, but you have to kind of pick and choose because every writer is going to tell you to do something different. Every writer is going to say, this is the way to do it, or this is the way to do it. So you kind of have to pick and choose and say, oh, this makes sense to me. I'm going to pay attention to this. Or, no, I'm not going to plot out. What is the stupid snowflake method of plotting? You don't know. I'm not going to go and figure that out. And it's really hard to discern what advice is good and what advice is bad. I did have a great critique group, and we didn't always agree all the time about writing or story, but they really helped uh, teach me how to self-edit, which I think is the single most important skill an aspiring writer can learn to do, is how to edit themselves. You take all the advice, you kind of absorb it, and then you say, okay, well, this works. I'm going to use it. This advice doesn't work. I'm going to toss that away. But learning how to self-edit yourself and being self-critical without destroying your creativity is a skill. I couldn't teach it, but it's something everybody needs to kind of figure out on their own.
You know,
As
that's
Hemingway said, write drunk and edit sober. And, and there's some truth to that, tell your story and then go back and fix it. And I think a lot of writers are in such a hurry to get it out there. And with Amazon, you can do it in a microsecond. Stop, put it aside, come back and read it again. And you'll say, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. Either good. Oh, that's
Actually,
great. Or, oh my God, that's terrible. But somewhere in between. Yeah.
you make a really good point. I many, many years ago on one of the RWA loops, a woman posted that she was self-publishing her book, and somebody asked who her editor was. She goes, oh, I don't have an editor, I can't afford one. And when I start selling, then I can hire an editor. And it's like, that's the wrong way to think of something. That is your name on the book. If you're going to put the book out, it has to be the best thing you can write at that moment in time, and it needs to be edited. We are not editors. I mean, I can self-edit my books, but I guarantee you my editor makes my books better. And not just a copy editor. I mean, obviously I make mistakes and I might not see them, but the copy editor, the developmental editor, when she points out, a timeline problem, or maybe something is too wordy, or I need to expand more, whatever it happens to be, I'm a good storyteller, but my editor definitely makes my books stronger.
Yeah.
And people that forget that part of the process, I think that the quality of self-published books, because it is so easy, there are some self-published authors that are amazing,
Right.
absolutely amazing. Liliana Hart is terrific, and she is self-published almost all of her own books. She has an editor that she hires. She has a professional cover designer. She has a copy editor. She understands that she has to put out the best work. Um, but it's the ones that haven't, that just throw it all out there, that's really almost destroyed the self-publishing industry. I think it's so much harder now because of the lack of quality control.
Oh, completely agree with that. And unfortunately, what people don't realize is once you put it out there, it's out there forever. So you're not going to be just embarrassed once, you're going to be embarrassed forever. So word of caution, absolutely get professionally edited before you put anything out. Amazon made a rule, you can only publish 3 books a day now, which is just insanity. But, to your point, it's been ridiculous because people are trying to do AI and it's just not readable. And then the readers get burned because they're buying this and it's trash and they've wasted money, and it's very aggravating. So it's really, really a shame because it has hurt self-publishing tremendously. So regarding rewriting and editing, how many times do you rewrite your books? How many times, let's put it this way, how many times did you rewrite your books in the beginning when you first started writing? And now that you're a lot more experienced, obviously, how many times do you rewrite your books?
I think rewriting is kind of, I don't necessarily like that word because it doesn't really speak to my process.
I agree.
Okay.
So
Okay.
in the
Editing.
past,
I think it's
so
more
in
like
the
run
past,
throughs. How many times do you run through the book and fix
yeah,
stuff,
because
Yeah.
basically? Yeah.
well, so in the past, like when I was first starting out, and probably for my first 6 or 7 books that I wrote and was published, I would write the entire book and then I would go back and edit it. And, sometimes cut, delete, do whatever I needed to do, leave it. And I would probably do that twice. I would do it once on the computer and then once on paper. I would print out the whole book and read it on paper. I think actually it's a big problem now because you don't see the mistakes on the computer that you see in print, but everything's now done on the computer. I can't even get paper copy edits. I used to. By the way, my publisher would send them to me. This was St. Martin's Press. I had to specifically request them. But with COVID, they say, oh, I'm sorry, COVID, we can't send out paper copy edits anymore. And then now that you can't even get them, nobody does them. And that makes me really sad because I feel that not just me as the writer, but the copy editor misses things because everything is done on a computer and you read differently on computers.
No
That's just
question.
my
Yep.
little rant. So I used to get at least the copy edits on paper, and then I would edit on paper and send them back to New York. And that ended in 2020. And that actually made me very sad, because I do think there are more errors in books that could be prevented if we didn't have that process. So, but as far as now, as I started um, becoming more experienced and understanding my own writing process, I adopted something that James Rollins does, and I tweaked it to fit me. So I listened to him speak at a writers group, and he said that he would write about 10 pages a day, print them out, and then edit them that night and edit on hard copy. And then he would go back the next day, make those changes, and then write the next 10 pages. And so he was like kind of going like this. So by the time he was done, he would just give it like a read through, but the book was all pretty much complete. And then he would just clean it up or whatever. I like that idea. It doesn't quite work for me, but I like the concept. So what I do now is I will write, and then the next day I'll reread what I wrote the day before, whether it was one scene or one chapter, and then I'll go on. Sometimes I realize I'm really stuck. This is not working. And so I'll spend a lot of time writing and rewriting, say, the first 50 pages before I can go on further in the book. And I think the reason is I see problems now, whereas in the past, I never saw any of my problems. I didn't see story issues. I would just say, no, just got to get it out, got to get it done. Now I say, okay, this isn't going to work. This is going to work. This is stupid. I can't believe my character would never do that. They would never say that, or I will get stuck on a plot point and then just say, so I go back to the beginning, rework it and rework it. And I will honestly say the first 100 pages take me as long to write as the last 300 pages.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just to
And
really
once I
get
get,
yourself settled in to the plot.
yeah, once I get past that like 100 to 120 page mark, all of a sudden it just clicks and the rest of the
Yep.
book just like flows.
Exactly. You climb the hill and then it's downhill after that. No question. I talk about writing to the midpoint. And once you get to that flex point, the twist where things change, the story changes, the character changes, everything changes. And now you're on the, once you get to that point, the writing becomes easy and fun. But boy, climbing that hill can be tough.
It's not easy. And
No.
for me, it's like the end of the first act. I have to be able to get to that end of that first act and the beginning of the second act before I can, and I don't plot. So I don't have this all
Yep.
structured out. I just
Exactly.
intuitively know which of my where the turning points are. And once I know I've met it, then I'm like, okay, that's it. And
Right.
then I go on. And then ironically, this is the thing about editors, almost always the most edits I have in a book is in that first 100 pages.
Mm-hmm.
After
Almost
spending
always.
a ton of time on it. That's so funny.
Well, I know obviously your stories are complex and have a lot of moving parts to them, and I really love them. The writing is beautiful, but the storytelling is even better. How do you do your research? I know I see you pop up on the crime scene writers every now and then. I know you ask me questions from time to time, but do you research, like you have a story in mind and I need to know this, this, do you gather all that, or do you just start writing and research as you go along with what you need at that point in time?
I mostly research as I go, and the only time I don't is if it's what I call like a plot critical point, if I have to know something before I can start writing.
Right.
Like, for example, one of my characters, she was a former US Marshal. I kind of had to know what the process was to become a US Marshal before I could actually sit down and write her as a former US Marshal, So I did a lot of research on, what is the Marshal Service? What did they do other than fugitive apprehension and courthouse security? And so I, spent like a day just reading everything I could find, just to kind of get into her mindset and what is the training like, that kind of stuff. So if it's something that is really important to the overall story, then I have to know it at the beginning.
Mhm.
But if it's like a little tidbit, like I email you all the time, Doug, and which you are a godsend, because if I get something
Bless you.
wrong, it is going to be a medical thing.
Yeah.
And so what I do is I will take oh, I need to find out how long, a body decomposes under these circumstances, whatever. But I'll just do XXX. And then I will search it later and try to get all those little
Right.
things. If it's plot critical, I might stop and send out emails right then and say, hey, I really need to know this because if it's this, my characters are going to do this. But if it's this, they're going to go this other direction.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it's interesting you'd say that. My book Tunica just came out a few months ago, the fourth Kane Harper book, and it dealt with the U.S. Marshal Service. Basically, it dealt with the Witness Protection Program, which was pivotal to the entire story. But I realized, I kind of know what it is, but I don't really know what it is. And so I had to research the protection program. And of course, the U.S. Marshals Service runs that program. And how it works, and it became critical to the story. And I kind of knew, like you said, but I didn't really know. And I did that before I ever started the book because I knew where that was going. But then other stuff came up as I went along.
Well, and I think it's important to have a basic grasp while also recognizing that we write to entertain.
Right.
And so you have to have that balance. You don't want your research to show on the page, but you want to be as accurate as possible, but you don't want to bore the readers. And that's why you never see in a book cops sitting around doing a bunch of paperwork for an entire chapter, because that
Right.
would be extremely boring. So we just assume that they're doing their paperwork off page because we're
Right.
not going to write about it. And yes, it may not be completely realistic. I know my daughter is a cop, and she has to spend like the last 2 hours of her shift. She sits in her car. She's still on duty, so if she gets a call, she has to go, but she'll be there typing up reports. And sometimes they're complex, and she has to go work overtime to get them done. But she's sitting there on the computer in her patrol car, just typing
Yep.
up these reports. Not the fun part of being a cop.
No, cops do not like reports. Plus, once you put it down, now it's available to the court, and God knows what's going to happen after that.
Actually, it's available even
Yeah,
not just to the court.
I know.
Anybody can request it.
Yeah.
Same with her body camera. It's can all be requested. I think unless it's like under certain circumstances, you can't get it. But yeah, it's a tough business.
It is a tough business.
And it's gotten harder and harder, unfortunately, because it's gotten more political, which is.
So let's talk about your latest book and
Yes.
this entire series that you have. That's wonderful.
That's my latest book here.
Yes.
I love the color.
And here it is here.
Purple.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that cover. I love that cover.
Thank you. My agent and I were just talking about the cover today. This morning, he sent me a little note, congratulating me on the publication and everything, and saying, I love all the covers in this series, but I really think this is my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. I love the use of color. I mean, the purple.
Oh yeah.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
And it
So,
really
so
goes
tell us
well
about
with all the
Costa.
other
Tell us about
ones.
Quinn and Costa in this series, and then
Yeah.
tell us about this book. What are they up to in this episode?
Well, so overall, the series started with I had the idea I wanted to do a mobile response team, an FBI mobile response team. And I came up with this idea many, many years ago when I went through the FBI Citizens Academy. We were talking about research. One of the things I love is hands-on research. So I went through the FBI Citizens Academy, and I got to meet a lot of agents in Sacramento, none of whom are still there. They've all retired or left and gone on to second careers. But I learned a lot about them. And one of the things they have ERT units, which is evidence response teams. And they're these like specially trained agents that if you have a complex case, they will go out and collect evidence and do things that crime scene investigators would normally do. They have specialties. I learned about them because of the Yosemite murders. If anybody remembers Carrie Stainer and the
Yes.
Yosemite murders, that was the Sacramento ERT unit that actually investigated those crimes. And they, Sacramento jurisdiction went all the way up to the Oregon border and all the way down south to, I think, the LA County line. So it's a huge geographic region. So I was fascinated by this because they could travel this big area. I didn't want to write a book about one office. I wanted to travel across the country because I get bored very easily. And my Lucy Kincaid series all takes place in San Antonio. So I wanted to say, I want to go to all these little towns. So I came up with this idea that I would call it the mobile response team, but basically the best of the best. And they travel to very small rural communities all over the country to solve complex crimes when the local authorities um, have no, resources to be able to do so. Um, I will say my film agent told me, she says, oh, but it's not a real unit. I'm like going, you think that in Criminal Minds they have a jet and they fly all over solving serial killer crimes? That's not real. And yet
Right.
that show seemed to do pretty well. But I digress. Anyway,
And the
so I
real
came up with
CS
this idea.
guys don't carry guns or make arrests or any of that stuff.
You just kind of have to
Yeah.
willing suspension of disbelief. And my unit is actually more believable. So I have it as basically a kind of a test unit that one of the assistant directors wanted to do this to make the FBI closer to respond to these kinds of cases. So my main character started it, and it was to investigate a serial killer, and that's where Kara Quinn, who's an LAPD detective, she was on administrative leave in Liberty Lake, Washington, and she came across one of the bodies. So that's how she kind of got involved with the team. And so I've gone to Liberty Lake, Washington, which is a tiny town outside Spokane. I've been to Patagonia, Arizona, which is a town of 1,000 people in South Arizona near the border. I did the San Juan Islands and a tiny town in the bayou in Louisiana. So I've had a lot of fun going to these different places. See How They Hide is the sixth book in the series, and it takes place. I have two murders on opposite coasts, one in rural Virginia and one in Ashland, Oregon, where my daughter went to college. And I said, okay, well, I have these two murders on opposite coasts with the exact same MO. So I split my team up and they started investigating. And they end up meeting in Colorado in a small town, South Fork, Colorado. Uh, it was This is actually a good book to start the series because the first five books, there's a lot going on with regards to Kara's backstory and why she ends up working for the FBI. And in this book, this is the first book where she is actually accepted this role with the FBI, and that she is at a different place. She had got rid of a lot of baggage that had carried her through the first five books, and now she's in a better place. So I think it's a good place for people to start. And if they like the writing, of course, I want them to go read the first five books. But so anyway, that's kind of like the premise of the book. And the whole idea, I started writing just like, oh, what if I had two murders exactly the same across country and they were committed at the exact same time? So there's more than one killer. How would I investigate that? And then I just started writing. So I had no
I like
idea
that.
initially what was happening until I met Riley Pierce, who's a secondary character. And I think she comes in chapter 3 or 4 or 5. I can't remember. She comes in relatively early, but I get into her point of view and I'm like going, ooh, she knows something. This is exciting. So then I finally figured out. Now, I'm not giving anything away because it says it in the cover copy. There is a community in Colorado called Havenwood that kind of all of these crimes are stemming from, but nobody knows where Havenwood is. So that was kind of like the little twist. Once I met Riley, I said, okay, well, she's from this mysterious community. What does this mean? And so that's kind of how I write.
I
And
like what you said. I'm a pantser too. I just have an idea, kind of like what you said, and just start right. Let's see where this is going to go. But when you said when I met Riley, and that's it, you meet characters all the time on this journey you're taking to tell this story, and you have no idea they even exist until they say, "Hey, I'm over here, and I can help with this story." And it's like, yeah, cool. Come on in. Yes, I love that.
yeah, and
that's
what was really fun about it was so the girl that died in Ashland, she was 21 years old, and Riley is her old roommate. She was supposed to be in France, and I originally thought she was in France until she shows up on the page because in the second chapter or the first chapter, I said they hadn't been able to reach her old roommate. And they'd been trying to reach her old roommate who was on this internship program in France, like the study abroad things.
Right.
And I'm like going, oh, they didn't meet her. Well, I wonder why she didn't call them back. Well, it's because she was traveling from France to Oregon to learn more about what happened to her roommate and her best friend. So yeah, that
Love it.
was a lot of
I
fun
love
when it
those
all
little,
kind of all came together.
I love those little magic moments. Yes.
Absolutely. So Allison, tell us where our viewers can buy your books.
Well, hopefully they're in anywhere books are sold. Obviously, Amazon, you can get ebook and the print book. They should be in Barnes and Noble. They're in any most independent mystery stores. I'll give a plug to my local one, the Poison Pen. They have copies in hand, and they actually I'll go in and sign copies for them. So they ship anywhere. So yeah, hopefully it's available and out everywhere. I never get my reports until like the next day to make sure that they got out. So they're there, and
Cool.
yeah, I hope my readers like it, because it was a fun story to write for my characters.
And I want all you writers out there to know, and many of you already know that the Outliers Writing University, Allison is a teacher at the university. She's did a couple of classes this year for 2024, actually last year now, and she's got a couple of classes she's going to do in 2025. So go to outlierswritinguniversity.com and you can see and then join us and learn to write your own novel from experts like Allison, who we love.
Absolutely. And I want to ask our viewers to please click the thumbs up if you've enjoyed this interview, and please subscribe. Just click that little button. It's free. And that way you won't miss any future interviews. And we've got a lot of great stuff coming up in 2025. And Allison, thank you so much for being with us. You are amazing. We always love interviewing you. We got to have you back. You've got great advice for everybody. And yeah, it's just a lot of fun.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Thanks. It's always a pleasure. Well, that kind of concludes this episode of Get to Know here on the Outliers YouTube channel. But, come on back and we will have more down the road. And we hope to see you then. Until then, keep reading, keep writing, keep having fun. We'll check you later.